Kia ora koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei huinā. He mihi tēnei ki nai tuahariri me nai tahu. Ko Boyd Warren ahau, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everyone. My name's Boyd Warren. I'm from ChristchurchNZ. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here today to this Economic Insights breakfast and very important workforce workshop to follow. Big thanks for coming along. We really appreciate your time and your input. And hopefully, like me, you'll draw some inspiration from this amazing place, the architecture of the town hall and the beautiful Ōtautahi awa behind me. But before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. The emergency exits, there's a couple in this room and there's plenty out in the foyer. If the alarms sound, please exit using the nearest one to you. And the assembly point is in Victoria Square behind me. Or over here actually, I think. If there's an earthquake, it's safest to remain indoors and follow the instructions of staff. The toilets are out there in the foyer on the right if you're heading that way. So, today's hui follows on from a similar meeting we had in April, where we introduced partners such as Ministry of Social Development, Ōtautahi, and the Regional Skills Leadership Group, and the roles they play in supporting and growing our labour market. Today's session will be comprised of an Economic Insights presentation from Jorge, Chang, Urrea, Senior Economist from ChristchurchNZ. Then I'll speak briefly about some of the interventions that ChristchurchNZ is working on. Then we'll have a panel discussion where we've got some experts to engage in Q&A with you, the audience. And that includes Leanne Watson, Chief Executive of the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce, Philip Roth, a Director at BDO, and Patrick Bryant, Area Manager for Westpac. They'll discuss the practical impacts of the data that Jorge's presented on businesses, potential opportunities and solutions, and an outlook for the future. At 9:10 sharp, we'll finish up that part of the event, and then the second session will begin, and that's that workforce workshop that I talked about, where Simon and Karen, who lead our Skills and Employment program, will discuss workforce challenges and potential interventions to address the challenges. And in the April hui, there was quite a focus on medium to long-term interventions. Today, we'll be focusing slightly more on short-term interventions. And we'll really be looking for your skills and expertise and input there. So we'll appreciate that in advance. So without further ado, I'll invite Jorge up to share his insights, and please do save your questions until after the presentations, and we will direct those to the panel. So thank you.
Kia ora katoa. Tēnā koutou katoa, sorry about that. Morena, my name is Jorge Chang. I'm a ChristchurchNZ senior economist. As you can tell from my accent, you probably think I'm from Invercargill, but I'm not. I'm from a galaxy far, far away from here. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And the idea of this economic update is to really give you a couple of really helpful insights that you can take today, and hopefully it will be very, very helpful. So, starting with economic activity, here you can see the Canterbury Economic Activity Index, which really tries to compare Canterbury's economic performance with the national performance. I have to say that this index was developed by ChristchurchNZ last year, in September last year, in order to track how a region was doing compared to the rest of New Zealand. And in order to do so, we take into account some regional available indicators, such as jobs online, retail spending, exports, and some others. And here you can see, let's see if I have the point, yeah. In April 20, obviously because of the lockdown, we had this really amazing dip here. And in April 2021, we have this massive increase, but this is really because the indicators that we're comparing it with a very low base. But the important thing is this one, that Canterbury has been outperforming New Zealand economy since May of this year. So what happened in the second quarter of 2021? I know it seems like ancient history now, but it's important to see the latest official figure, which 2.8 quarterly percentage growth, which was quite unexpected. Most of the major banks were expecting an economic growth of 1.4, and as you can see, it was almost doubled. So that was really good for the country. And in terms of productivity, we are always asked why Christchurch in general has a lower GDP per capita than the rest of the country or the rest of the other major cities in New Zealand. And it really boils down to productivity. So in terms of GDP per filled job, Auckland and Wellington is above Christchurch. So I think Boy will talk more about it and how we might increase that as well. Here you can see the performance of manufacturing index, which is done by Business New Zealand. They also produce another indicator called the performance on services index. And it's important to see here that everything that's above 50, it means that the manufacturing sector, in this case, is expanding, where if it's below 50, it means that it's contracting. So the important message in this slide is that through most of this year, Canterbury's manufacturing index has been expanding. So it's been on the expansive side. According to the economic growth forecast from the major banks, we're expecting for the third quarter of this year to have a drop in 7% in terms of quarterly growth rate. And after that, we're expecting a hike in 2.8. Next week, actually, the 16th of December, Stats New Zealand will publish its latest economic growth data. So we will know for sure. So probably an early Christmas present. Probably we'll get those pair of socks that nobody wants, but we'll see how that goes. In terms of regional economic confidence, Canterbury has been doing better than other regions. This is the latest data from Westpac's McDermott Miller data. And actually, Canterbury topped all of the regions in the latest quarter, which was the September 2021 quarter. And it had a net confidence percentage of 25. This is measured by the difference between the percentage of respondents that think that in a year's time their situation will get better with the people that think that their situation will get worse. So in general, people in Christchurch are very confident, and there is some truth to that because manufacturing sector is doing well, also construction, and also the export sector, which I will talk in a wee while. In terms of retail spending, Christchurch has been doing quite well, also Canterbury. As you can see here, the retail spending amounts during 2021 has been actually above the amount in pre-COVID times. So that's really good news. And in the year to October 2021, Canterbury retail spending has been up by 7.3% compared to the previous period, and Christchurch retail spending has been up by 8%. So that's quite positive. And what have people been spending on here in Christchurch? So a quarter of the people spends most on groceries and liquor, probably more on liquor than on groceries, but followed by home and recreation, retail, and hospitality. So this really gives you a glimpse of where spending is going in the city. According to Canterbury exports, they're also doing quite well, as I mentioned. As you can see, the level of exports, which is the blue line, compared to pre-COVID levels, are higher. And also the export value, up to the year to October 2021, has been up by 5% compared to the previous period. The top destination for Canterbury exports is still China, and the top export is dairy products, followed by machinery and meat. So what are the main takeaways from this part? Well, economic activity has been robust despite the current environment, which is very challenging for a lot of businesses. Regional economic confidence is up. Retail spending has bounced back as well. Businesses are better positioned to cope with restrictions like the one we suffered in the second lockdown. And net exports are doing quite well despite the fact of global supply chain issues and a lot of disruptions. So inflation, you probably know that the last figure that was published by Stats New Zealand is that in September 2021 quarter, the annual percentage rate of inflation reached almost 5%, which was the highest in a decade. So if you see this graph, the only one that surpassed that was the one in June 2011, which was the period after the GST was increased up to 15%. And this year, really, there's been a perfect storm for inflation, basically due to a solid demand and a constrained supply. And I'm not going to read all of the factors, but you can read them by yourself here. A lot of things have built up for this perfect storm to happen. And according to the market forecast, we can expect on the last quarter of this year an annual inflation rate of 5.6%, which has been the highest since 1990. It's a long time ago. The Soviet Union was still around, so you can imagine. I was young then. The main takeaways of this part is that inflation has been growing rapidly, and we can expect that to keep going. And inflation is going up not only in New Zealand, but all over the world. In terms of Canterbury, construction is one of the main industries. And if you see the data, you can see that most of the raw materials that are used in construction have been up by almost 30% on average. And anecdotally, I've been speaking with some construction, and they told me that their costs have gone up by 40%. So it's really having an impact locally as well. Moving on to the labor market. In this table, you can see the number of employees in Christchurch in February 2020, which was pre-COVID, and February 2021. And the three main industries that gained jobs between this period was healthcare and social assistance, followed by construction and wholesale trade. So which industries were the ones that lost most of the jobs? Retail trade, hospitality, and transport, postal, and warehousing, very linked to the tourism industry. So in total, between February 2020 and February 2021, the city lost approximately 3,700 people. However, what has happened with the unemployment rate? It's been going down. So in New Zealand, in the first quarter of this year, it was 4.6. Now it's 3.4. And this has been happening all over the country. For example, in Canterbury, it went from 3.9 to 3.4. In Christchurch, it's also has gone down. So that's also positive. In terms of jobs online, Canterbury has experienced a higher growth and higher numbers of jobs online. Most of them have been in the healthcare sector, according to SEEK, also in the IT sector, manufacturing, and construction. And this is quite interesting, the IT one. So the main takeaways from this part is that unemployment rate has been constantly decreasing. And although Christchurch's unemployment rate is still higher than the rest of New Zealand, it's decreasing. The services sector has been expanding quite rapidly, and also there's been a significant upswing in employment and working age population growth in Christchurch as well. Moving on to interest rate, as you know, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has a dual mandate, which is basically to maintain price stability within 1% and 3% in terms of annual percentage change of inflation, and to support maximum sustainable employment. So as I talked before, inflation has gone down, and unemployment rate has gone down as well. So really, they have all the arguments to hike the rate, which they have done. And the last one was in the 24th of November of this year, where they hiked the rate from 0.5 to 0.75. And it's expected that they will increase the interest rate in the short term. Actually, next year, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has, I should say the Monetary Policy Committee, who's the one that actually makes the decision whether to hike or not the rate. There are 7 sessions that are programmed for next year. So if they hike the rate
for about a quarter percentage point in each of the sessions, we can expect interest rate to reach at the end of next year of 2.25%. And some say that it could even be higher than that. It all depends on if, at the moment, nobody knows what the new traffic light system will look like in the short term. So it will depend. They might decide to hike the rate faster than earlier, or maybe they will decide to hike it by half percentage point instead of a quarter percentage point. We'll have to see about that. And in terms of Canterbury, really, we don't see any other reason for us to be affected more or differently than the rest of New Zealand. And also the increasing hikes will have a direct impact on mortgage rates, which probably you've seen already in the market. So that will have a direct impact on recent homeowners as well. And moving to the last part, which is housing markets. I mean, we know that house prices have been going crazy during this year. And despite this eye-watering growth that we see all over, Christchurch is still it still has a median house price, which is almost half of Auckland's. The interesting thing about this graph is that here we can measure housing affordability, which is basically the ratio of average house value to average annual earnings. And here you see that Christchurch is still way below Auckland and Wellington and the average of New Zealand. So this means that despite what you read in the news about Christchurch having a house price that has grown by 30%, Christchurch is still the most affordable big city, let's say, in New Zealand. There's a buoyant housing market across the country. It's something that is not happening only here. It's happening all over the place with significant house price growth. And another interesting thing that's been happening in the city is the strong growth in number of residential building consents. Building consents have been up by almost 30% in the last year. And interesting enough, most of them have been allocated to apartments, townhouses, and units instead of standalone houses. And Christchurch in general maintains a good reputation as an attractive place to live. A lot of availability of jobs, as we see on the jobs online figures, affordability of living, and a general good lifestyle. So looking forward, we can expect to have a tight labor market. All the figures show that there's a lot of constraints for people to get employees into their companies. And there's also the risk of wage price spiral with low unemployment. And this translates into more inflationary pressures. The other thing that's important to mention, it's an increase in value of residential mortgages and debt servicing costs. So this will have a direct impact on discretionary incomes and on lower spending. There's also a high proportion of equity in owner-occupied housing and land, which is currently at an all-time high, around 80%. So one may ask, are there too many eggs in one basket? And obviously you have COVID-19, which has disrupted the world, and we will have to see next year with the new framework if things will develop differently, and if the supply chain issues will continue or not, because that's one of the main things that have been disrupting I would say, most of in the industries. So I'm right on time. Thanks to Kat for that. Ngā nui. Thank you so much for your time.
Ngā mihi nui, Jorge. There's plenty there for the panel to chew over shortly with help from the audience. Some of those labour market risks are definitely already being realised and experienced by some of the employers in this room. And the resilience of the Canterbury economy you highlighted is heartening. There's certainly some turbulence ahead, and there's a bit of dependency on central bank behaviour, I'm sure, and what the future looks like. But before I highlight a few of the economic development programs that ChristchurchNZ is working on to realise some of the opportunities and challenges that Jorge highlighted, I wanted to show you a couple of other indicators that inform ChristchurchNZ's work. And socioeconomic well-being, So economic inclusion, quality of life and reduced inequality, they're critical to the success of our region, and they're key thrusts of ChristchurchNZ's statement of intent, and also the Greater Christchurch 2050 strategy that's currently being formulated. And we could see growing inequality at the start of COVID. If you see down here, more people were feeling that their quality of life was poor and becoming extremely poor from 2019 to 2020. And so the next update, which will come when the CDHB staff who pull this data together, they stop their pandemic response activity, they'll be able to update this and these indicators. It'll be a really fascinating update. And you know, in 2020, 17% of Christchurch or Greater Christchurch residents said they didn't have enough money to meet their needs. And so, you know, economic inclusion and reducing inequality is a key thrust of our work. And I'm sure you'll all agree that shared prosperity should be something we're all striving for. Now, regional measures of productivity are not readily available. We do know our per capita GDP by region, and we know the average wages by region, but there's some really other key indicators that inform our work and we're striving to improve. And you can see there that in terms of the amount of venture capital attracted to Christchurch, you know, it's been sitting around 8% below our population share. The number of patents per 100k of population is relatively low. You know, we're the second largest area of the country, so we should be, you know, in the first or second position. Let's be a bit parochial about that. Now, I know patents aren't the only measure of innovation, but they are one. And the level of employment in knowledge-intensive industries, where we are third in the country, and of course those higher wage sectors are the ones that pay more and drive higher productivity and ultimately prosperity as well. So we're always striving to improve those sort of measures as well. And towards that, these just a wee showcase sample of some of the activity we're partnering on. The Innovation Entrepreneurship Ecosystem, partnerships with UC and Urrea at ThinkLab and Te Haka. We were incubating really knowledge-intensive, potential export, high-growth businesses, and that's been a roaring success with 100 new jobs created in the last year. We run innovation challenges, which are really well supported by business, tertiary and Crown research institutes locally in aerospace, food, fibre and agri-tech and health tech. We have recently, in response to COVID, run unemployment to self-employment incubators in partnership with Ministry of Social Development and others, and they've been a roaring success where, you know, people who lost their job through COVID had a great business idea, and through the fantastic support network we've got here in Canterbury, turned those business ideas into real businesses. So very cool. And of course, in partnership with the Canterbury Chamber of Commerce, we deliver a regional business partners program, and that grows capability within local SME businesses. And since COVID, I think collectively we've helped about 5,000 businesses improve their management capability and to innovate. So those are really, really strong and powerful economic development work programs. And of course, the topic of the day, skills and employment. Our work program is across 4 streams: grow, attract, retain and enable. I've just sampled a couple of the pathway programs there. Whitiora, a hapu-led skills hub in partnership with Ngāi Tuahariri. Hōpara, pupil pathways, where we're helping underprivileged children into STEM study and then careers beyond that. Education to employment, so, you know, children from high school, rangatahi from high school, who are ready to leave school and go to work or training, and making sure they're landing in the right place and it's enduring training or employment. And of course, above the line activity, we've been promoting Christchurch, that Christchurch is hiring to expat Kiwis in London, Australia and up north, in the hope that they'll come here and bring their skills with them. And then the very, very diverse work program that we have to try and, you know, improve all those indicators: productivity, innovation, high-value jobs. We've got clustering programs across the screen industry, the Antarctic Gateway, our super nodes, food fibre, agri-tech, health tech, and high-tech services. And with those clustering programs, we're seeking to get industry, tertiary, and all the actors within the clusters to align around challenges and opportunities and hopefully do shared projects. We've got our visitor attraction program. You can see some of the creative that we've delivered down the bottom there. Our major events team working diligently under extreme duress. Tip my hat to our events and business events teams who have had the most disrupted time you could possibly imagine. And we're seeking to attract business owners and investment to Christchurch as well. We've just got an urban development function, which is placemaking and integrated urban development, which can really unlock some potential in the city. And that's all supported by our brand and marketing team and our strategy and insights team. And Jorge gave us a sample of that today. So, thank you for that, listening to that quick expose. Without further ado, let's get the panel up. We just need some muscle to get the chairs up on the stage. It's a pity you're not sitting up the front, Ivan. You could have done that yourself, probably. One fell swoop. So come on up, Leanne Watson, Philip Roth, and Patrick Bryant. So the purpose of this is to delve deeper into the insights Jorge's provided and share a business perspective with a particular focus on the labour market. So I guess the first question is, and there's a couple of roving mics going around, so when you've got a question, just put your hand up and one of the team will come and find you. But I guess the first question, team, is what can industry do to alleviate some of these labour market pressures? Anyone want to have a crack at that? What industry might be able to do to alleviate some of the labour market pressures?
Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, yep, great, thank you. And thanks for turning that spotlight off so we can actually see. Look, I think the biggest challenge, without stating the obvious, is that we simply don't have enough people in this city and in this region to actually address the growing economy that we have in front of us. We didn't have enough people before COVID, so we certainly don't have enough now. So there's a number of things, I guess, that I would look at, and some of this is not necessarily about industry, so I'm going to talk a little bit about both very briefly. I think the first one is we need to recognise that when we talk about growing our own within New Zealand, we also need to recognise that for some sectors that takes some time to build that pipeline. So in parallel with that, we must look at our current immigration policy settings because we, at the moment, we just don't have the ability to bring both skilled and unskilled labour into this country in some of the sectors that we need. That said, I think there is a role also for industry to look at how they are repositioning and changing the perception of some of the sectors. And if you look at manufacturing as a really good example, there are many people that simply don't realise that manufacturing has significantly changed in the last 20 years. So the perception of some of our sectors, particularly by some of our parents and some of our young people, is very different. So I think there's an opportunity for some sectors to really do a great job of changing the narrative, changing the perception, so that some of these sectors are seen as good options for our young people that come through education. And then probably finally, and many businesses are doing this and doing a great job, is how do businesses look at their current workforce and retain them and upskill them, reskill them into areas that will be needed in the future. The future of work is not the future of work's now. And so working with the individual staff and actually growing that talent, growing their skills, reskilling them, and making sure that they also do some work with their leaders to help their leaders manage leading through change, because that's a new skill in itself and it's fundamental and actually changes the only constant that we're seeing at the moment. And so supporting leaders to support your people through change, I think, is essential.
Excellent. Anything to add, Philip or Patrick?
Yeah, morning koutou. Just actually following on from what you just said there, I know we scream out retention, but it's retention. I can't emphasise that enough. Could I challenge you, if it's not part of your top 3 strategic agenda items, it probably needs to be. Because it is so tough, we're having to be so innovative around the way that we're keeping the people we have got. I just jotted down a few things. I went through half a dozen client strategy plans during the week, and yes, that was a top item for their agenda. But also strategies to ensure that that retention is actually working need to be actually implemented. So there needs to be some robustness, some accountability from the governance table. Also, just something that we've noticed a lot in business, and this actually applies right through to the manufacturing sector as well, is the importance of being innovative around things like scholarships, internships, and making sure that we've actually got pathways for people to come on board. And I know even in our own business, most of our graduates actually come from summer internship programs, so they're actually already part of the organisation. But we're seeing a lot of success in other businesses, and particularly manufacturers, where I know a lot of you in the room are representative of those as well, bringing interns on board and making sure that they have an opportunity going forward. Just a couple of other things I had. I know this is obvious and it's said a lot, but actually not just talking about acknowledgement beyond the pay packet, but actually what are some of the innovations and wellbeing measures and things we can do to support our staff. I know a lot of businesses offer and encourage community activities and things that can keep people engaged because it's just simply not about the pay packet. And finally, one other one that's really been growing amongst a lot of our businesses that we're working with is actually a little bit of retro, going back to some of those employee share schemes, but doing them in a really innovative, fresh way so that we can have some of the key members of the organisation coming through, having a future, having a bit of an equity stake in the business. We've actually seen a huge upswing in those sorts of structures.
Excellent idea. I'm sure a lot of employees would relish the opportunity. Patrick, have you got anything to add to that question?
Just a little bit further in terms of, absolutely retention is the key, but the nature of work is changing. So it's retaining good staff, regardless of their skills, and upskilling them in the ability to transition from one type of role to another and move through the organisation, but be retained, all of that intellectual capital retained within your organisation. So having an eye for teaching your staff to be nimble, to be able to transition, to be comfortable or more comfortable with change. Getting comfortable entirely is not necessarily going to happen. And I don't think it's going to be a switch. We're looking at what's transitioning with the borders. The feeling, certainly on the Westpac side, is that the government may well actually tighten the restrictions rather than open them up. So keeping the people you've got and training and developing those people into the roles that you're going to move towards in your business is going to be the key.
Excellent. If there's any questions from the audience, just feel free to put your hand up and my team will find you. Just while my team's finding you, it would be unfair of me not to, and you said immigration policy settings, Leanne, it would be unfair of me not to say what more could the public sector do to alleviate the skills crisis. So, Leanne, do you want to lead off on that?
Thanks, boy.
I could just leave it there and say the public sector, we need to address the immigration policy settings.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I probably would add one thing, not necessarily in regards to immigration, but just hearing Patrick and Philip's response. I think the other thing that we should always be considering, and I think we've done a great job of this in Christchurch over the last decade, is really think about non-traditional ways in which we operate across the labour market. So, what we've seen post-Christchurch earthquakes was we tapped into resources that were not traditional ways. So, for example, we saw a massive increase in women in trades. And, ARTA did a great job of actually looking at supporting a whole bunch of people that were not normally involved in that sector, and grew and developed our women to be involved in that sector. So, thinking outside the square and really thinking about how we can also share resources across sectors. Again, we saw quite a bit of that, when we went into sort of a lockdown situation last year where we had people who were not able to work, and we had other sectors such as our supermarkets screaming out for people to stock shelves because everyone kept buying toilet paper. So, thinking about things differently I think is really essential as well, and working across your sector and across even, across different industries as well to tap into those resources, I think is another good way of looking at it. It's me avoiding your question.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got a couple of questions. The gentleman down the back, and I'll come to you next, Ben. Cheers.
All right. Is it going? Yeah, Morena. I'm Nigel Sharpland from Infact. I think one of the other aspects which hasn't been discussed here is the question of automation. And larger economies have a big stack of machinery that do a lot of the jobs that Kiwis are actually doing manually. And I heard a stat just recently that 30% of the mortgages that business owners are taking out on their homes are actually going into business investment. So question is, what do we do to liberate some cash into automating our economy to not only ease the burden of manual labour, but also, or not just manual labour, but labour, but also to increase our sort of net productivity.
Fantastic. There's kind of two parts to that. Patrick, are you seeing that debt phenomena that was described there?
Well, certainly we've seen that there's a real focus on investing in the automation of business, absolutely. I would suggest while it is going to take out the manual labour aspect, it's going to change where your demand for labour is. So you're going to need more highly skilled machine operators and so forth. So it doesn't necessarily take away the issue, it just changes the focus of it. Debt's an interesting thing at the moment. Obviously, we'll probably come onto it in terms of where the market is heading with interest rates, constraints on lending against homes, which have recently come in. The purpose of that will potentially make it more difficult to borrow for those purposes than easier. So how do we actually invest in it? I'll leave it a bit open at the moment because at this stage there's so many moving parts that it's a little bit unclear as to how that's going to pan out over the next 6 to 12 months. We also clearly have restriction in the ability to get that kit into the country to put it in place for automation. So there's two parts of the puzzle. Can you get it, and then can you fund it or afford it?
Philip, are you seeing automation on your business strategies?
100%. And just off the back of that comment, it's not a negative Nelly comment, but the reality is most of the kit that a lot of the businesses we're dealing with, you might as well at least double the lead time. So I'm thinking about some of the work I'm doing in the trucking sector and some of the manufacturers. I mean, I know you know this again, but you actually need to think way more ahead than you realise and actually start to allocate reserve capital well in advance for those projects. So, some of the financial modelling we're doing, we're going well out to 3 years, so we actually are thinking about what those milestones are. The other thing I just wanted to add, because it's a really good question, is it's not just capital automation, it's as much about systems automation, and we're seeing a huge upsurge in the way that ERP systems are talking with business systems. Again, almost complete end-to-end technology platforms. And surprisingly, those the generation that said, no, we'll never use that technology, are sometimes the first adopters. So we've actually got to be careful not to assume that certain age classes will or won't adopt those systems and processes. But I just want to add that to the capital part, because it's actually sometimes we forget about the process side of business as well.
Yep. And I'm sure, Leander, that's a key focus of the manufacturers network that runs out of the chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. And, completely agree with what has been said as well. I think one of the other things that, just moving a little aside from automation, what we have seen over the last 2 years is massive acceleration, particularly around small businesses' adoption of digital tools, because of course, the adoption of digital tools is also a great way to improve productivity. And for a lot of small businesses that sit outside of sort of the manufacturing sector, where automation is probably one of the biggest areas of focus, adoption of digital tools is absolutely essential in terms of the way in which they'll operate in the future. They won't be able to engage with government, for example, in the future if they are not well and truly digital. So I think there's absolutely a focus that needs to be put on that. And I think secondly, we also have to be mindful at the moment that access to capital is probably the second biggest issue for small business. It's been the biggest issue for business, and particular small business, again, well before COVID, and it's just been exacerbated because most businesses, first of all, are at their debt limit, because of what they've experienced in the past couple of years. So their ability to absorb additional costs, and we know that the costs are rising significantly, and their ability to borrow more, and their appetite for that, given the ongoing uncertainty, is a bit of a challenge. So, and I'm talking to all of you who will probably be facing some of this. So I think it's just trying to balance all of that out. It's pretty complex out there. So, yeah, whatever we can do to support businesses in those areas is certainly a lot of what we do at the Chamber to advocate for, greater flexibility around access to finance. And that's something that, I spent a lot of time talking to Minister Nash about as one of my small business advisor roles. So watch this space.
Thank you. Ben.
Hi, Ben Reid from Hamilton Jet. I don't even know if it's a question. I'm going to pitch it as a question if I can. But look, I'm sat here representing a company of 450 people in manufacturing. We're a 97% export company selling products into, the whole world. And I'm sitting here almost sick to my stomach because we've got the worst kind of problem that I could imagine. We have a absolutely full order book, 50% up on anything that we've seen in the past. Lead times blown out to 12 months, and I cannot get people to make my products. I am struggling with the engineering teams and the office teams. I'm putting salaries up to try and prevent losing people. I like the thing about retention. We have internship programs. We have graduate training programs. We have adult training, tertiary training programs. Have 20 apprentices within the company. We're doing all the right things. We've got a great company brand. We're not actually losing people. But I'm still completely hobbled by the situation that we're in. We had a track record of bringing skills in from overseas, for example, the Philippines, great trade skills, CNC machining, foundry workers, etc., and we can't do it right now. And I'm fighting my suppliers for people. So I'm stealing people, and then they can't supply me the parts. So it's serious, It is a serious situation. And my question, if I now pitch that into a question, is what the hell can we do about it? Because honestly, we have to open the borders. We're a country that is growing up on immigration, skilled immigration. We're not talking about the very lowest levels of labour. We want skilled people. What can we do to help that situation?
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, we've got a lot of empathy for that situation, and Hamilton Jet's one of Christchurch's true frontier firms, so it's sad to hear that predicament, that's for sure. And there was a journalist in the room before. It would have been, I think she's left. It would have been good to hear that impassioned statement. But Leanne mentioned immigration policy settings and the Chamber, ChristchurchNZ. We're all, every possible committee or submission process, we are all submitting that we need to bring skills in the short term, because we've all got programs, I described some before, to grow local pathways, but in the meantime, we've got to get some skilled workers in. So, where we can, we're trying, but welcome the views of the panel, so dive in.
I don't know how to answer this one without being very political, but I
Have a try.
absolutely hear what you say, Ben, and it's been one of our most frustrating conversations with the government around just their inability to see this and their inability to address it. I had a session a couple of weeks ago with the Prime Minister. We were given very short notice. We were able to only invite 8 people, and one of the most compelling issues around the table was exactly what you just articulated, and we had a member from Mid-Canterbury who talked about, so they've invested over $1 million in a piece of machinery from overseas, and it is lying dormant in Ashburton because they cannot get the right people from overseas that they need to actually operate this machinery. And as a result, if they get the machinery operating, they can create 30 more jobs in Ashburton, and they can't get it. So the Prime Minister was very, very interested in that story and wrote lots of notes and took up a significant amount of the 45 minutes that we had with her. And Lisa, I don't know if we had any update on that, Lisa from our team, and Sarah, who deal with immigration. So, we are doing all that we can to elevate and escalate and talk directly to, ministers, officials, the Prime Minister around it. At the moment, we're not getting the traction that we need. We obviously did have, a significant announcement around the pathways to residency for the 165,000, 165,000, 110, something like that. Yeah, 165, yep. To stay in New Zealand, which was significant. But so step in the right direction, but we absolutely need to do more. So, yeah, and I think the other challenge, that we've got is, again, the public sector is growing significantly. So we are also competing with government organisations who are poaching private sector staff, which is what the journalist is going to write about tomorrow, so you'll see that in the paper.
I just want to add something, and I know what concerns me a little bit is your story is you're not alone, and of course we know that. No, we don't have any silver bullets because we're looking for them as well. But the concern I also do have, which is really starting to manifest now, is our reputation overseas, when we can't get our key people to actually put that plant equipment, because I know the markets you service are all over the world, and now we're getting tapped on the shoulder to say, when are you guys actually going to be here? So it actually goes the other way from a brand Aotearoa reputation as well. My only other solution is, do you drink whiskey? I'll take you for one later. Because seriously, I've gone through about 3 or 4 Jack Daniel bottles and I've never had that much in 6 months. It is actually quite a stressful thing for businesses, and I can see it with you as well. And it's to support you just by having the conversation, to the point where some of our even the agricultural businesses that rely on overseas people from the UK, they are so stressed to the point they're saying, "Can I actually do this anymore?" So we're trying to actually do a support package around them first and foremost, just to get to the space. And then, well, I decided a few weeks ago it's time to advocate. So we've booked in meetings with MPs because we can't wait any longer. And I appreciate what you're doing as well. It's advocate as much as we can, but have a totally realistic expectation as well.
Yep. We're reinvigorated, Ben.
Yep.
Yeah, because it is tiring.
I'll see you later.
It is tiring saying the same thing over and over, and not being heard, isn't it, Ben and Philip? So, but that's reinvigorating. The gentleman here.
Hello, Michael Edmonds. I work at our Institute of Canterbury. I do have a question, but just on the previous question, the TTAF funding has resulted in a surge of engineering students coming through at diploma level. So probably not early enough, but as of probably the end of next year, the polytechs around the country will probably be turning out about double the normal amounts of technician level engineers. So my question is, you've talked about retention and growth, and one of the key areas to do this is in professional development of staff. You've mentioned one area is the adaptation to digital tools. Are there any other areas that you see are important for the professional development of people in industry, and what can the educational institutions do to support that?
Question.
Whoever wants to take it.
Maybe to start again. So I mentioned earlier, leading through change, I think is absolutely essential because it is challenging. It's all very well to go through a change program, but actually if you don't bring your team with you, I think that's really challenging. And at the Chamber we're going through a significant amount of change, and so I'm acutely aware that in order for us to actually get the very best and get our team engaged, we need to do that better. And we see that across the community. I think going back to some of the basics as well, in terms of making sure that people can be flexible, adaptable. So some of those basic soft HR type skills I think is really, really important, and often get overlooked for the more technical skills. So I would just encourage a focus on some of those softer skills, critical thinking, co-creation, working in collaboration, all of those sorts of things that we sort of just take for granted that people have, but often they get lost. So that would probably be my focus.
Yeah, that's a really great offer. Is there any other themes that the tertiary should be considering?
I was just going to add, and it's implicitly with one of the slides that you brought up before, is I do believe we need great engagement from industry and sectors right back to the beginning. Yes, there are moments of intervention at high school levels and pre-tertiary, but actually I think that is going to be critical for us going forward, but it needs to be programmed, implementable and accountable. So I'm putting my hand up there as well, because we realise it's something, even our own profession, it's actually fallen off the cliff a little with far too many graduates coming through, and now we've got this massive problem that probably could have been partially solved with a lot more early intervention. So I think we've got to acknowledge that. I think it's a huge opportunity going forward.
Thank you.
It's not that it's not being done, we need to do more of it.
Thank you. We've got a question over here.
Yeah, Keith Shaw from Window Treatments. Just on the back of those sort of heartfelt stories from Ben and the one in mid-Canterbury, why are we not using the media to highlight those stories? I mean, our political people in Wellington thrive on the media exposure and don't like it when negative things are highlighted. So I would suggest that would be a strategy we should be driving. These sort of stories on the evening news will do a lot to advance that case.
It's a great point.
It is.
Mm.
It is. I'm looking at it.
It does require the media to report them, though.
Yeah, I'm looking at our comms manager, who's a veteran journalist there, and I mean, for instance, I imagine ChristchurchNZ will be doing some releases from today, and Stuff were here earlier. Unfortunately, the reporter left before the panel, but you're exactly right in the point you make. And look, Leanne's a fantastic spokesperson for industry and the media. So, yeah. I suppose it's having those skills and abilities in-house to be able to do press releases, isn't it? Yeah, so maybe more in-house media training for businesses. Okay, we'll take one more question from the floor if there is one. Well then, if there's not, we will wrap it up there. I've been told 9:10 is the cut-off time, and the workforce workshop happens now, and from the workshop we want to get a clear direction as a combined group of public sector and private sector, and some tactical short-term interventions as well as longer-term strategic plays. So I'd like to thank the panel. That was really, really interesting. It would have been good to go on for another 20 minutes, actually. I think there's some topics there we could really riff on. But look, ngā mihi nui, everyone. And for those of you staying, head upstairs. For those of you going, thanks so much for coming, and thanks again to the panel.